It's a jar. It's exactly what it is. It is a jar, and so it's a jar for holding liquids like beer. You could also hold grain in jars, things like that. So you've got this sort of eating symbol, and you've got this sign is the Dug sign, and Kudug, you have really a tablet that's about rations. This is a ration tablet that's telling you how much people are receiving in the temple as a form of payment for their service. So easy. I mean, you guys could figure it out on your own what this is. Now, these simple systems or these more complex systems can also exist along very, very simple ones, like at even later periods. In Egypt, for example, at Deir el-Medina, you'll have recording tablets of laundry where you have pictures of shirts and then dots on them to record the numbers. It's important to realize that literacy was not widespread at this time and was really sort of used at the elite level, especially in these temples. In the early dynastic period, around 2900 to 2350, we see another transition, an even more linear system of lines being used. Now a full-fledged system that's not just administrative, but by the middle of the period, we are seeing those myths, poetry, and other things becoming recorded commonly. You can see the transition of those signs. Here again is our Dug sign down at the bottom. These signs are inverted on their side and converted into very standardized systems of wedges, and this is cuneiform, right? This is the system of cuneiform writing using wedges, these sharpened reeds, and impressing them into clay to use standard symbols. And here's an example of some of the different shapes and the different tools you would use to make these marks. I actually had some tablets that I was supposed to bring in today. I'll bring them in tomorrow. You can take a look at them and see what it would be like to hold these tablets and use them and make them. A very durable writing system, right? You fire these things and they're almost indestructible. That's why we have them even today. In addition to writing, at Uruk we see the use of seals and sealing for identification. Now, seals we've seen very early on. We talked about seals at Tepe Gawra. This is a gable-back seal from the 4th millennium. Very, very early. We even see them at Catalhuyuk. But during the late Uruk period, seals take a dramatic shift, and there is a big change. We see the introduction of the cylinder seal, which we mentioned last time. And again, the cylinder seal warrants a bit more attention too. It's different than a stamp seal in the way that the artist in creating the images upon it, everything is going to be carved in reverse and then impressed into clay in a constant freeze, right? This is an image that can repeat over and over and over again ad infinitum. So you can imagine really needing conspicuous use of space and sort of this endless loop of images. And it's during the Uruk period that really we see some of the most beautiful examples of cylinder seals. It's a tradition that will continue again for thousands of years. Up until around 300 BC, people are still using cylinder seals. It's an extremely long duration. And at first they're carved into very soft stones, like here at Uruk. They're carved into marble. Later on they'll be carved into harder stones like rock crystal, lapis lazuli, hematite, which requires quite a bit more skill. And they're very important for a number of reasons. They are used in a variety of ways, and we can actually track the changing use of materials, sizes, shapes. This is a map from Rofe where you can see where cylinder seals are used and how. Here's a variety, just a shot of some of the different seal shapes and the different kinds of materials that are used throughout the years. There's some stamp seals in there as well. Here's another image of what it would be to actually carve one of these seals using tools to do so. And some of the uses for them. Seals could be used to seal packages, documents, We saw seals being used to seal those clay boule, right? And they're unique art pieces that actually create other art pieces, right? We're talking about two things, right? This is a seal that will create seals. And so it's important to differentiate the use of the actual cylinder seal, which creates the seals, and then these seals themselves, which we do find in antiquity. We actually see these being worn in depictions of people. This is actually an early dynastic image, but you can see there's a pin holding this gentleman's cloak together, and hanging from it is a beaded chain, and at the bottom of that there's a cylinder seal hanging there. So these are actually associated also with the protection of the owner. They're invoked in rituals against illness, against jealousy, in addition to their sort of everyday use for sealing things, for notarizing documents, treaties, and protecting private property. For us, we see them change quite a bit over time, so they're very important pieces in terms of their the cultural or economic significance. Let me just move on to the late Uruk here. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. These seals are often passed down from father to son. We see them, or father to mother. They stay within families. And often we'll find periods, say, much later on, like the Ur III period, in which we'll find these very early Uruk cylinder seals. So there's a sense of longevity, a sense of permanence. They're often tied to seats of office. And this would be a way of establishing, for example, your legitimacy in that social hierarchy that we see emerge during the Uruk period. If you're going to be a governor of a city, then you have the cylinder seal that belonged to the previous governor and the governor before that. So these seals of office are quite important, in addition to all the other attributes that come with seals and sealing. I should mention too that seals are common in Egypt as well, but instead of the cylinder seal, which was popular in Mesopotamia, scarabs are actually used as seals from the Middle Kingdom, mainly the Middle Kingdom into the New Kingdom. And we'll see some scarabs as well, but those are used as seals too. Let's take a look at that for a moment. We're talking about the Uruk cylinder seal, some of the repertoire of the imagery we see. Well, you'll see this referred to as glyptic art, kind of that rope. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying art that comes from cylinder seals. So this is the glyptic art, and these very tiny pieces. You can see the high quality of engraving that's taking place. Very much like pottery, right? These early cylinder seals right off the bat are totally beautiful. And then sort of counterintuitively, later through time, as they get a little bit more mass-produced, they get uglier and uglier and uglier. That doesn't say there are still some beautiful cylinder seals, which we'll see in later periods, but right off the bat, right, these things are just absolutely gorgeous with these naturalistic designs of wheat and staples, bulls, goats, ewes, these sorts of things. In addition to religious markings. Anybody remember what this is? Right here? Or who this is associated with, this symbol? This is a reed bundle. We've seen this before. We talked about this. It's from Uruk, so it's associated with a god, and you have a 50-50 chance. It's either Inanna or it's Anu, right? Right, so this is the reed bundle that's associated with Inanna. We're going to see this over and over and over again. It's just reeds tied together with a bit of a flag. It's kind of a standard, a royal standard associated with her. And if you remember, we saw this early on in one of these Uruk cylinder seals. This is a very important cylinder seal, which we'll look at. This figure in the center, flanked by two rams, and right there are Inanna reed pillars, and then these vases, these two vases, and I want you to remember these two vases because we'll be coming back to them in a moment. I should also say the rosettes are also associated with Inanna. This motif, this sort of axial motif with a central figure on both sides, is called the Master of the Animals motif. We see it in the Uruk period, and it's going to continue on for, again, over 1,000 years. Here's another Uruk cylinder seal where you can see the same figure doing the same thing, right? Feeding these rosettes, these symbols of Inanna, to the herds, taking care of them, making them productive. And again, this is our end figure whose job it is, right, to keep that cycle that we talked about last time moving. Cylinder seals in the Jemmet Nasr period change a little bit. These seals were originally thought to post-date those of the Uruk period. And you can see this isn't a very good photo at all, but they tend to be a little bit different. They're much fatter. They're these squat sort of things. They have these geometric patterns. And you can see that the depictions aren't nearly as clear. They rely a lot on drilling, and they're very, very sketchy. They have a common repertoire of motifs, a lot of times seated women with long pigtails doing domestic things, herds, in this case sort of a stylized fish motif. And it was thought that these came after the Uruk seals, but very much like those systems of writing we just looked at before, the truth is more complex, right? These were actually used at the same time in some cases. The Jemmet Nasr style cylinder seals last longer, but they were used at the same time during the Uruk period. And it seems as though these different cylinder seal types, right, our Uruk type and our Jemmet Nasr type, were used for two different purposes. It's thought that the Uruk seals were used to identify individuals. So each seal has to be distinct, it has to be unique from all others, so that when you use this seal to sign a document, it's immediately recognizable that this is the signature of a specific individual. The Jemmet Nasr style is much broader and perhaps represents an institutional affiliation rather than individual identities. So you're linked to a kinship clan, a priesthood, a specific echelon of governor or city official. And that's actually held up in the archaeological record. We see these seals, the Uruk style, being actually used. We find the sealings from them, so we know they were actually used, whereas these Jemmet Nasr style, we don't find the actual sealings. So it seems as though these are the more decorative symbols that you would hold and wear. So that's a big split. We're going to move on to some of the pieces that actually come from the Iana complex itself. With this urbanism and centralization taking place in the Uruk period, more and more we see an explosion of representational art, also associated with cylinder seals and writing. We saw how architecture in the Uruk period is used to create an image of power and wealth across space and across time, this uniformity, and how it's used to sort of become a physical manifestation of a worldview. Art goes hand in hand with that. And in the Uruk period, we see a number of examples that become much more sophisticated and much more nuanced. During the Uruk period, we see a shift from art simply from the product of performative action, right? And what I mean by that is that at, say, Catalhoyuk, right, we saw art being put up on walls, but then replastered over and over and over again, not for its own sake, but probably more, as a result of rituals taking place. Now we're seeing art serving a purpose very similar to writing. Art being used as another form of communication, as a form of storing information and conveying it to a third party. And it takes a tremendous amount of skill and labor. Art is being commissioned for the first time by these rulers and used for political and religious propaganda. This is one of the